Hi there. This is Mary Poplin with Boris FX. Welcome to another Office Hours. So today we're going to go over a shot that I got from my friend James, and that's James Markham Hall. He's over with Dog Stars Inc. and Super Pups. And he's done this show, and it's a live action show about his VR show. So he has a VR show where he has his dogs, the Super Pups, actually have powers and solve mysteries. They work at this place called the Daily Beagle because it's adorable, and they're real life crime solvers. And he's making a show, like a reality show, about making this show. Except for it turns out in the reality show they also have powers. So I'm going to show you a breakdown of these 8K Panavision shots that he's organized in After Effects from Premiere. And I'm going to show you how to start breaking this down for visual effects. It'll contain some green screen and some background plates. And remember that you can ask your comments or questions right in the comments section, and I'll answer them. These are live and unscripted, all right? And I'm going to show you what we're working on today. All right, I think everybody can see my screen. So let's hit play. All right, so what we've got here is we've got this this sort of breakdown where he's talking and his super pups show up and they're going to pop onto the screen as if they're teleporting in or flying in, as you can see in this shot. Now we have done a rough green screen pull here, and for the most part, because these were shot super high res, the green screen pull's pretty good, except for his arm is underneath them. Can you hear now? I'm seeing that there's audio issues, but I'm getting that there is audio. So I just checked in the monitors and I can hear it. So if you can't hear it, please let me know. All right. So what we've got is we've got this shot, and you can see that he's got his super pups popping into view. Please let me know in the chat if you can hear me or not, and I'll continue. All right. So I see that we can hear. Perfect. All right. So if you look in the chat, you'll see content monsters, and I believe that that is actually James, who's here to answer questions. Wonderful. All right. So let's get started on this shot. I want to show you a couple of things. So to break down what got sent to me are these lovely sort of overlapping shots, one after another here in After Effects. All right, so we've got all of these shots here in After Effects, and you can see that they are stacked one after another. Now, this is not a really good way to work as far as rotoscoping goes or with Mocha. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these shots and we're going to isolate them and then work from there. So this got roughed out by James, and I'm going to clean it up. So let's go ahead and look and see what he did here. He's got a Mocha Pro shot, and let's look at what he's done over here in Mocha. And he's put some Primat Studio on here as well. Now, the Primat Studio is mostly doing a really good job here on the top, but underneath we do have some problems. And one of the problems is we've got an arm underneath the dog, and that arm is shadowed, all right? And that arm is occluded and going underneath the dog. There's no real good way to pull that. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to roto that, which means we're going to roto the legs of the dog back over the top. So let's talk a little bit how to do that. We can either do that inside of Mocha Pro, or we can do that inside of Primat Studio. If you look, we've got our Mocha mask and track. So if you were just using Primat Studio in here, you could go ahead and make this outside Mocha mask as a Mocha mask from off, okay? And then you could launch Mocha And it says that the host is not set to full resolution. That's on purpose. It's because these are 8K shots. But from here, what I could do is I could come in here and I could start to adjust this, right? But the problem with this is I don't want to use my Mocha inside of Animate Studio right now, just because I kind of want to show you how to do this in regular Mocha in case that you're not using Animate Studio. Although Animate Studio is a great keyer and I do recommend you do use it, but we're going to use Mocha and I'm going to launch Mocha. And you can see once again, it's not set to full resolution. And that's going to be kind of a problem because we've kind of got this Mocha that's in the middle of our shot, and we want to make sure that Mocha is going to read it correctly from the timeline. In newer versions of Mocha, this is pretty well fixed, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually delete this Mocha file, okay, and I'm going to select my footage, and this is Peaches, you can tell because he's got a little peach on his chest, and we're going to go to Layer and Pre-Compose. We're going to move all attributes into the new composition, and we're going to adjust the composition duration to the time span of the selected layers. All right, so let's hit OK. So now when I come into my little comp here, you can see I've got Peaches. And now I need to start rotoscoping Peaches. So if I select Peaches, you can see we've got Animate Studio on him. Let's go ahead and apply a new instance of Mocha Pro. And I'm going to drag this all the way to, well, actually, let's launch here. And we're going to hit continue. All right, so here's Peaches. And you can see that it's loading the footage regardless of how this is working. Well, I'm sorry, Frederick, that you don't have any sound. I suggest that you try reopening your sound controls and unplugging and replugging in your headphones or speakers, because I think that's what's going on. I think everybody else can hear, so you might be encountering an issue there. Although you can't hear me say that, so I don't even know why I'm letting you know that. All right, so let's go here. And let's start to isolate this super pup. Now you can see that this has been a little bit, well, this has been shot in Panavision and it's been shot as if you were shooting cinematic footage. So we don't have a whole lot of color correction happening on this shot. So we could try to come into our color space if this were Mocha Pro, the standalone, and adjust this. Or we could try to pre-compose this with color correction on. I'm not going to worry about any of that because I can see this good enough. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to select my Spline tool. All right, so now let's come over here and let's start drawing some shapes around this little pooch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a shape right around this sleeve, just like this. And I'm going to relax for curves and pull tight for some corners right here. All right. And again, we're going to kind of round this out here. All right. So now we've got a pretty good roto shape on that arm. Next, we're going to come in here and we're going to grab this little paw. Just like this. And what I would do in the future is if I were going to shoot this, I might try to put my arm underneath this costume while we're holding the dog up, because that would actually make it a little bit easier to roto as well, because then you don't have to worry about patching back here. I'm not going to worry about this because I think when this gets color corrected, we can just color correct this green down to brown and nobody will ever see it. But, you know, for the future. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to come over here and grab this side of the cape, just like that. And we can probably track all of these at the same time, but I wouldn't worry about tracking too much more than a couple of shapes at a time. Let's call this cape. Let's call this foot. And let's call this sleeve. Okay, and now we're going to hit track backwards. And we're going to only track translation, scale, rotation, and shear. Now, the reason we're tracking only translation, scale, rotation, and shear is because when we track those, that's going to be your best options for rotoscoping. Because a lot of times when you track perspective while something is rotoscoping, have you ever been tracking something and seen your shape completely meat cake in on itself? Well, what that's doing is that perspective is shifting too far in Z space. And when that happens, the corner of the surface tool, and we've done a lot to the algorithm to make this happen less, but it still happens. The corner of that surface tool is going into a negative value, which is to say past the plane that Mocha uses as like the camera plane inside of Mocha. And it doesn't matter if it's negative 0.0001 or negative infinity, okay? It'll still shoot off at the same, and it'll sort of fold in on itself because the math doesn't work anymore. So we want to make sure when we're rotoscoping, especially objects when they're moving back and forth in perspective and really close to the camera, that we are not using perspective when we track, especially with rotoscoping. Now, if you do have trouble tracking something for rotoscoping, you can also just switch to translation only. You can switch to something like translation scale only, and you can change those at any time while you're tracking and then turn them back on. One of the big misconceptions about Mocha is that once you do your settings, that's where they are. You can't change anything, but that's not true. You can change the settings anytime, and you can also change where the shape is looking. So when we track in Mocha, the shape is where the track is looking. But this surface tool here that I just turned on with this blue button, that is what the track is doing. And a lot of people get this mixed up. And I talk about this every office hours, and I'm going to talk about it forever because it's the core concept of Mocha, which is the shape's what the track is looking at, and the surface is what the track is doing. You can hand animate the shape however you want, all over the place. But that track follows what the math is doing. Now, we did have somebody ask earlier what happens when you use manual track and how to use manual track to get around an object that can't be tracked. And I'll show you that really quick as soon as this finishes, because I do want to answer that question. It got answered before we started. I'm sorry, it got asked before we started. All right, so we're not tracking the foot anymore because there's no foot left to track. But remember how I said we can change what we're looking at? I'm just going to go ahead and bring that shape up and probably move to translation only. And now hit track backwards. And now that foot is going to slide off screen and keep tracking. So that's what I mean by we can change the settings at any time. Up, sleeve, same thing. Let's go ahead and take the sleeve and take it down to translation only. And let's bring that up a little bit and hit track backwards. All right, so, and of course, the cape as well. No problem, translation only. And we may even have to move these off screen manually because they may all stop. They did. Okay, perfect. So this is a good example to show manual track. All right, so now what I can do is I can switch to manual track. And I want to make sure that I make a little keyframe. So let's just, what I like to do is I like to wobble a corner, back to where it was and sort of create a keyframe and then go all the way to the end and move this off screen. Just like that. And so what that's done is that's created a manual keyframe between an area that couldn't be tracked. Once again, we're going to switch to manual track. I'm going to wobble this corner a little bit. And, excuse me, let's delete that keyframe. There we go. And now let's go all the way off screen. Just like that. And now we're going off screen. And same thing for this little dog foot. Let's switch to manual track. We've made our little keyframe and off screen, just like that. All right. So now what we can do is we can hand animate these, or we can track them in the other direction. I'm going to track them in the other direction. We can also track while we're in manual track like if we hit track 1 frame forwards, we'll still track all 3 of those in manual track, but it can get really messy because you can then affect the track. So I want to get rid of these keyframes where I can't manipulate them anymore. So we're going to go back to large motion, and you see all of my keyframes go away. And that they're still here. They're just not able to access. So if you come in here, you can see here's our track keyframes right in here. All right. So, and they're going to be all the way down here where we started. And of course, because this shot has been cut, we have the tail over here. All right. But now let's go back here in our timeline, go back to our parameters, and let's hit track forwards. All right. So we're going to track this forwards and let this follow the cape and the foot and the sleeve. If we really want to, we can also use this auto stabilize or quick stabilize mode. What that does is that pins our shape into the middle of our screen and then moves our object around the middle of the screen. And why does that matter? Well, it can be a really good way to check your track, A, and then it can also be a really good way to rotoscope, because rotoscoping is kind of a pain. So what we can do is we can take this roto shape and we can pin it, and then we look for where there's problems with the roto shape and correct them over time. Now, the other reason this is tracking pretty quickly is because I'm tracking in what is essentially proxy mode. Remember when I was in After Effects that I actually jumped into this and started with a lower res, like 25% view screen. And because Mocha is reading from the timeline instead of After Effects, what that does is that allows me to read a lower res version into Mocha. So now we're processing a lot faster, and we're not worried as much about things like reading 8K footage 1 frame at a time. Now, the plugin is what I use more than the standalone. We do have access to the standalone. The standalone Mocha Pro is what a lot of Nuke houses use, for example. Even though the plugin is available for Nuke and it's a little bit cheaper option, a lot of people opt for the standalone version because they're using much larger files and they're using things like TIFFs and EXRs, and they want to read them at speed and cache them. And the Mocha Pro standalone is a little bit faster because it's not going through a host. Now, After Effects is much faster than it used to be, but anytime you have a host process footage and then feed it into a plugin, you are going to notice a little bit of a speed decrease. But like I said, there's workarounds for that. And in general, for my workflow, I don't use the standalone anymore because I mostly stick to After Effects. And even when I'm in Nuke, I tend to still use the plugin. But to each their own, and you got to do what works best for your workflow. All right. If anybody has any questions while we're tracking, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep talking about tracking. So when you track for rotoscoping, Mocha will basically cut down about half the time out of what you normally do when you're rotoscoping by hand. So however long it takes you to rotoscope a shot, if it takes you 4 hours to rotoscope something, in Mocha, it should take you 2. And that's because you're using that tracking data to drive a lot of the tracks. And that means you cut your keyframes down to about 1/3 of what you would normally use. You can also use Power Mesh for rotoscoping. The thing about Power Mesh is where you are saving time on hand animation, you're taking a hit on tracking. But there's some shots where that will be very worth it. If you have something that's kind of flexing and you don't want to hand animate that, you can always use Power Mesh for that. Now, here's my little roto shape for this foot. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to delete this keyframe. And again, we're going to go back to large motion and delete our shape keyframes for our shoulder here. There we go. And we're going to delete our sleeve keyframe as well, going back to large motion. So here we are. We're going to delete that. Okay, perfect. So now let's delete that keyframe as well. And let's go back to our cape here and let's delete that keyframe. All right, so now you see how I deleted those keyframes and I have the same size shape that I started with. Now I can get to hand animating these. All right, so Manny asks, please tell me about the stabilize and rotoscoping process. I'm so glad you asked because we're diving into that right now. All right, so this auto stabilize or quick stabilize mode, okay, what this does is it stabilizes based on the track, and it only stabilizes based on translation, scale, and rotation. But look, it pins right into the middle of the screen based on my track. So for instance, for this paw, let's go to our keyframe and let's make sure that this is exactly where we want it on our paw here. And I think this is correct. All right. So now let's scroll to the end of our shot right before we go off screen. And let's make sure that we don't need to make any keyframes. I think we need to adjust that edge a little bit. And let's go to the end over here. That looks pretty good to me. All right. So let's talk about our sleeve. So in our sleeve, though, you can see that we start out right on the edge, and let's adjust a little bit here. It doesn't have to be perfect, but let's adjust, especially on the edges and the bottom, make sure it's as perfect as it can possibly be. And now let's go to the end of our shot, and you can see that we actually do need to adjust this shape. Let's turn our surface tool off, and we can also turn off our other shapes, and let's turn off our tracks. So turning off the tracks is the gear, and turning off the shape visibility is the eye. So let's adjust this. And what we're doing is we're adjusting the edges. Now, I don't really care about this edge so much, and the reason is because I have the cape beside it. So we're not going to worry about hand animating this side so much. So now all we have to do is correct these. So let's correct this edge right here and correct this edge right here. So Manny is also asking to repeat the information about tracking position, rotation, and scale, etc. So when we track with rotoscoping, when we track for rotoscoping, like I said, we tend to not want to use perspective. All right, and the reason we tend to not want to use perspective is because of that surface going behind the camera problem when objects move in perspective, especially because people tend to move back and forth quite a bit. So we don't want to mess with any of that. When we are rotoscoping, what we're going to need to do, though, is we're going to need to make sure that we're animating on the arcs. So that's what I'm doing here while I'm talking. I'm making sure that I'm animating at the area of the most difference. Now, if we had tracked perspective on this, we might have gotten it to stick on a little better, but it would have cost us a little bit. Okay, and what that would have cost us is potentially it would have cost us a drift problem. So there's a reason why you want to track certain parameters and leave off others when we're talking about rotoscoping. All right, so let's just go over here and adjust this. All right, this is looking decent. And again, we're looking for areas of the most difference while we correct. In some cases, you won't be able to get a good track at all on an object for rotoscoping. In that case, I recommend either using translation only or using manual track to get past that section. Manual track can also be used to get past areas that are problematic like lightning strikes or quick lighting changes, total occlusions, or shadows. So make sure that you use manual track when you need to use it. It also, as you saw earlier, allows you to do stuff like track when you go off screen. All right, now let's track. There we go. All right, so let's correct this putting in Peach's angle. Let's go right here. We're going to get this sort of drift. So we drifted a little bit. And that's okay, but that's because we experienced a lot of motion blur as this dog went off screen. So now I've got this dog, I should be sweet. It's Peaches. Okay, and we're going to adjust this. There we go. And again, we're going to animate between the problem areas. So you can see that even though we are doing quite a bit of hand animation, we're still doing less keyframes than we would do if we were doing this totally by hand. So that is the power of rotoscoping with Mocha or with Silhouette, by the way. This technique works in Silhouette as well, depending on what your favorite tool is. So If you like using Silhouette, you can also use Mocha tracks inside of Silhouette to drive Roto. And you can also use Silhouette tracking to drive Roto. So there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat, so to speak. There we are. For those of you not from the US, many ways to skin a cat is a idiom. And I think it might be from the South. An idiom is a colloquial phrase. Okay. And I use a lot of them, and sometimes I forget that people don't know what I'm talking about, and I don't want anybody to think I'm actually going to literally skin a cat. Here we are. So we're just correcting this over time, just like this. Now, we are going to focus on Roto for one of these shots, but I'm not going to Roto all of these shots for office hours for obvious reasons. I am glad that y'all are enjoying these questions and answers. I really hope that that we get lots of participation for these. Please note that James is also in the chat, and he'll be happy to answer your questions about Super Pups and also how he uses Mocha. So make sure that you ask him questions too, because he was polite enough to join us. All right, let's see how that looks. We're almost done with the sleeve. We got a lot of wobble because this is a handheld pup. And we're trying to get that sleeve the whole time. All right, so that looks pretty good. All right, now let's go ahead and move on to the cape. Now, obviously, this Roto is not perfect. We could take more time and make it perfect, but this is an office hours, and I'm not sure how much of this y'all want to sit through. But let's correct this shape as well. Now, here's another cool thing that I can show off for y'all. When we're tracking, we can also use the transform tool. And the transform tool allows us to wholesale adjust the shape. Whole cloth adjust the shape, maybe. We can also use a magnetic snapping to try to snap this to an edge. Now, these edges are pretty blurry, so I don't know that we'd get a good snap, but it's Alt-S to snap. Or I want to say Apple S on Apple. And again, we can absolutely adjust this using the entire transform tool, just like this. Another question is regarding rotoscoping with motion blur inside of Mocha. All right, so there's a couple of ways to do that. When you rotoscope with motion blur or for motion blur, one of the things you want to think about is either applying the motion blur automatically in Mocha, which you can do by selecting whatever shape you want to do, using the Uber key, which does an all over ripple edit. Let me just show you really quick what I mean by that. So you see I've made a couple of keyframes here. If I use Uber key and just pull this out, do you see how it's done a ripple offset on my whole shape? Well, now if I come over here and apply motion blur with ripple edit, boom, I'll now have motion blur for my shot, and I can check it out by going to, let's go to matte for cape, and you can see that it will calculate with motion blur right here inside of Mocha. Let me just turn the overlays off so you can see. So you see how that's got a slightly blurry edge? So now we're rotoscoping with motion blur right inside of Mocha, and it's automatically generating that motion blur for us. So many things we can do to make motion blurs. All right, let's go back, turn our overlays back on, and select this. You can also, view your mats while you're rotoscoping, and, you can do things like view the actual cutout object if you like, right here, so you can see how your mat's being applied. So there's a lot of different views that you can use in Mocha to make sure that you're rotoscoping correctly. You can also do soft edges manually. So if I'm still using Uber key, for example, I can come over here and I can use like a lasso selection, and let's pick our edge, and I can select my edge here. And you can see I can make a feather outward. We can't do a feather inward, but we can do a feather outward okay? And that will be, once again, applied through my whole shot because I'm using the Uber key. You can also animate that feathered edge. So for instance, I could switch back to auto key, move this out, and then move to my next keyframe and make it smaller. And look, we're going to animate between those two as well. So that's, you can manually rotoscope motion blur in that way, or you can automatically add motion blur to roto shapes this way. When you are using the manual adjustment for rotoscoping motion blur, make sure that you cut the inside line all the way to the opaque edge. If you don't do that, you're going to have a little bit of a problem. So make sure that you're cutting all the way to that opaque edge and then fading off. Now, with green screen, it's actually pretty tricky to rotoscope motion blur. You'd be better off taking your object and then rotoing to your hard edge and then adding motion blur on top of the object once you're done, to sort of regenerate motion blur. And the reason I say that is because if you try to do a transparent edge on a green screen, you're going to pull that green screen edge. So the thing about green screens, and I think I mentioned this before, is everybody looks at green screens as if they're like this magic bullet, and they're not. Green screens are great, but most visual effects artists will understand that green screens have their limitations. And the more complicated you get with your green screens, the more complicated your, well, the more you're going to have to roto. This is the long and short of it, basically. Let's just tilt this up like this, tilt this over here, and let's bring this edge down. And you can see really quickly how having this transform tool can help rotoscope. So one of the big things that was big news lately, I don't know if y'all watched any videos on this, but there was much to do with Dune about how they didn't shoot blue screens or green screens. They shot sand screens, so what they did is they found a blue that they really liked, that when inverted was kind of a similar color to the background that they were shooting on, okay? And so then they would paint that sand color on the background. To pull the blue screen, they would invert the whole plate. Now, of course, if y'all have done that before, you know that that's still going to pull quite a bit of skin tone. Still a cool trick, because instead of having to deal with spill, they made a whole different set of issues for themselves. So they knew that they were going to have to do roto anyway. So instead, they just relied pretty heavily on the roto bits and pulled what they could with their inverted sand screen. So visual effects is getting more and more interesting in the ways that people solve problems and the problems they decide that they want to solve. So they already knew they're going to have to roto, so they just went ahead and erred on the side of roto, so that they could do as much garbage matting as possible. If you think that's interesting, please let me know. I thought it was fascinating. Pretty clever. All right, let's go ahead and adjust this over, and we'll talk a little bit more about what I would do for this shot as far as the top edge goes. All right, let's adjust this. And once again, I'm looking for the areas of most detail changes, right? So when I say areas of most detail changes, what am I meaning? I'm meaning I'm looking for the arcs of the animation. So if y'all have ever dealt with, is anybody in here actually hand animated? If you haven't, let me talk about that for 1 second. When you have like a bouncing ball, for example, you have a ball and it's perfectly round, okay? When you throw it at the ground, that ball flattens out, okay? And when it bounces back up, it gets vertical, all right? But it's always round. As that shape changes from round to flat to vertical, okay, your keyframes would be vertical, flat, round, and then you would try to make the computer tween between those three shapes. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect, so you have to draw a little bit of in-between shapes for that. So it goes from round, it's flattening out a little bit of the bottom, now it's flat on both the bottom and the top, it's coming this way and a little bit vertical, and then it's more this way, right? And so the more keyframes you give the computer to tween between, it used to be done by hand, but now it's done by the computer, the better your animation will be. Same principle applies for rotoscoping. You're looking for areas of the most change, and then you want Mocha to tween between them. But in order for Mocha to do a good job tweening between them, it's got to be able to know what those key shapes are. So what we're doing is we're putting in those key shapes, those key frames. All right. And that's why it's called keyframes, because they are key frames. All right. So now we have a very rough roto. But I want to show you a little bit more about how we could start to isolate this. So I can see that we have a beautiful, nice green screen at the top of this pup's head. All right. But I know that I'm really not going to be able to rotoscope all of these beautiful little wispy hairs. Let me zoom in so you can see. I really don't want to have to worry about rotoscoping all these beautiful wispy Shih Tzu hairs. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it might. I'll let James correct me on however we say that. All right, let's come over here and let's make a new shape for the top of our dog. And notice how I'm just going all the way around our little hairs here. We're going to call this head rough. Maybe I should call it head rough. Ha ha ha, I'm so funny. Okay. I gotta make these entertaining for me too. And now we're going to take our head rough and we're going to link it to our sleeve. All right. And so now you can see that it follows off screen. All right. And so what I can do is I can correct this shape again. So we're going to correct like this. Here we are. There we go. And you can see we've got that key framing happening. James is a good audience. He's laughing at my bad puns. Thanks, James. All right. Here we are. Let's just rotoscope this right off screen as much as possible. There we are. And let's just pull this over a little bit. All right. So now we've got a very rough shape around Peaches' head. All right. And Peaches' ears, which we want to make sure that we allow for all of those beautiful details. All right. So now if we come in here and we hit save and we close, we're going to save our host real quick. File save. All right. And what we should get, let's bring this all the way up to the top. Let's just, here we are. Okay, Mocha Pro at the top. All right, and let's go to our mats and let's say apply matte. And now you can see we have something a lot cleaner to work with. All right. And what we'll do is we'll keep building up until we get all of our, let's just let this play. We'll clean this up until we get a really nice, clean roto for Peaches. And this ends up working really nicely. So now, because we pre-comped this, let me just save this. Obviously, we're missing his whole left side and his back legs, I know. But let's just go back and look at our Super Pups assembly. And you can see that we have a much cleaner Peaches right here. All right. Compared to Pudding, that we just did a really rough green screen pull on using Primat Studio, which is great. But we need a little bit better, more control in our roto shapes. Now, once again, you can use Mocha right inside of Primat Studio, and I do recommend that you do that. But because I'm going to be using Mocha for other stuff in this scene, for this shot, And this series of shots, I want to use Mocha so that I can continue to use it for inserts and everything else right on top of everything, because these dogs are going to be appearing on screen and then poofing off screen. And I want to make sure that when I am, having them come on screen and leave the screen, that I have like an insert that's like I think James had asked for a night crawler sort of effect, where they bamf on screen and then bamf off in a smoky sort of portal. And because of that, I want to make sure that I have all of my tracking data as a self-contained entity. So I'm kind of killing two birds with one stone. So I can use all my tracking that I'm doing for my Roto for an insert as well. Now, that being said, you could still export the Mocha files out of Primat Studio, but that's just an extra step that I don't want to have to do. So there we are. Let's go back to Peaches Comp 1. All right. And now let's do it. Let's just really quick. I'll show you what I would do for the rest of this. I'm not going to dive too far into continuing and fixing this entire shot, because it will take me more than an hour to rotoscope the entirety of Peaches. But let's go ahead and set this to continue. Once again, you can see that it's saying, hey, you have this at like quarter res. Are you sure you want to track in quarter res? And I absolutely do, yes, because these are 8K. So I want to track in 2K, please. All right, now I have a couple other tools that I can use. I can use the magnetic spline tool to come in here and grab this sleeve, just like this. And we can click and drag to just draw a shape if we like. I can also still use my just add to Xspline. I mean, not add to Xspline. I can use my magnetic tool to grab this foot. And once again, we'll just grab that whole foot. And we end up with these little beautiful roto shapes. So keep in mind that you can use the magnetic spline tool because it is pretty great. And there we go. All right, so now I've got two shapes. I would want to make another shape for the torso, just like this. And then I would want to make one last shape for this back leg. I'm just going to use the X-spline because we're dealing with this very light shape over another light shape. And again, we're going to make sure we have quite an overlap when we do that. So that's going to be our back leg. And this is going to be our other back leg right here. And for this, we're going to grab a little bit of that section for the tail. Actually, let's undo that. I don't want to do those at the same time. That's like what I tell people not to do all the time. Come in here, make a leg, and then make one more loose shape for this tail. And the tail, we can call this tail rough, and we can link that back to our sleeve, okay? And then we can track all the rest of these. We'd call this, what is this? Right back leg. I know it's on the left side of the screen, but I think it's the dog's right. And let's do left back leg. And we would call this chest. We'd call this right paw. And we'd call this right sleeve. All right, so then we could track all of these, and then we'd end up with this nice, beautiful dog cutout. And that would be our flying dog. All right, so we have about 15 minutes left. So I do want to talk a little bit about how we would composite this shot. All right, now if I wanted to composite this shot, we've got a whole bunch of pieces of footage. And remember, we want to take each one of these and we want to go to layer and we want to go to pre-compose, move all attributes to the new composition and adjust the composition duration. We want to do that because whatever we do inside of our little containment envelope is going to be a way that we can manipulate everything within it. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. So that's how I would do all of these shots, the same way that I did Peaches Comp 1. Now that I've got Peaches Comp 1, I got to do a couple of rough things with this. So I'm going to keep saying rough forever. One of the things I want to do is I want to animate some transparency onto here. So let's say opacity, and let's set that to 0. All right, and like let's say like 2 seconds into that, or a second into that, we're going to have it at 100%. All right, so now Peaches is going to fade in onto our comp. So it starts at 0 and appearing in. All right. So we just want that because we want to have something to transition while we're using our particles. So there's a couple of different things I can use as particles. Let's come in here and let's go to layer, new, adjustment layer. And let me just trim this down. All right. And now what I can do is I can take this adjustment layer and I can either, actually, let's do it this way. Let's go to layer, new, composition. I'm sorry, composition, new composition. All right. And let's call this particles. Okay. Particles, spelled correctly. All right. And let's actually say we want this at like, I don't know, let's do like 3 seconds. Actually, 3 seconds. Okay. Yeah. All right. So now let's add some particle illusion to this. So let's go to layer, new, adjustment layer. And let's come over here and let's go to particle illusion. Let's do BCC particle illusion, which is a great little tool. And let's say launch particle illusion. And what this will do is this will launch a really amazing particle tool. Now, for those of y'all watching this, if you don't have particle illusion, go to www.borisfx.com, and we do have a free version. In the free version, it's a standalone, and you can render out of it. So you could render a particle system out of it for free. If you want to have it apply to your timeline inside of After Effects, Nuke, Premiere, Avid, etc., you're going to need to buy the plugin, and you're also going to want to download as many of the presets as possible. And it comes with a ton of presets. I mean, just a ton. And you can preview your presets right up here in the corner. So, you know, here's Fairyland, and this is Angry Energy, you know, and here's a Glory Beam, whatever that means. So we have tons and tons and tons of presets. Okay, what I'm going to do though is I'm going to look for teleport. Yeah. So now I can add teleport right to my comp here. And you can see we have a teleport. Let's see. We don't have enough frames. So I'll actually add it right on. Actually, let's just show you the standalone. I made my comp too short for my teleport. But that's no problem. We'll launch the standalone particle illusion. And let's close this. And let's go to particle illusion. And yeah. Launch that. Let's go to file and let's open. And I'll show you, let's see. Let's go to our office hours. And actually, do we do an open recent? Whatever. We'll make it from scratch. Teleport. All right. So now we should have our teleport. Where did it go? It could be that we're using too much of our memory. Whatever, I've got something for that. Rather than wait on that, let's just import a rendered out particle illusion that I already did. So let's go to our downloads, and I want to say Super Pups. And let's just load in particle illusion. We have a backup. When things don't behave, we have a backup. All right. So now we've got a little particle illusion blip that we've used. All right. Now let's do something with this. Let's speed it up. I feel like it's a little slow. So let's go to layer and time, and let's do a time stretch. And let's say we want it to be like 50% as fast. Perfect. All right. Boom. So now we have our little particle illusion preset comp that we've made. I used this thing called Wispy Smokes. I used another effect called a Fairy Blast. And then I also used another smoke effect on top of that to get this sort of layered effect. And I changed all the colors. So let's save. And let's jump over to our Super Pups assembly. All right, and now let's take our particles and let's just drop them in on top. And let's do like a quick, I don't know, let's do a screen. All right, so now I've got my particle illusion effect. And we're going to drag it right over to where Peaches is. Down here. And so what we'll end up with is this sort of appearance of the dog through my particle system. Now we could also use insert to pop this in on top. And that's it. That's pretty much how I would go about breaking down this shot. Now, you might do things like come in here and take Peaches, and we could use the particle system as a matte, like a Luma matte, for example. So we could just duplicate this and come down over here to Peaches Comp 1. And we could say, hey, let's put this on normal for a second. And let's go, hey, use Peaches Comp 1 as our Peaches Comp 1, use particles as a Luma matte. And so it would only show the dog here in my particle system. And then we could just go ahead and animate this, transform in a little bit more of the opacity, and duplicate the shot over itself so that we still had Peaches appear back over the top. So I could come in here and take Peaches and do a duplicate. All right. And here we are. And instead of having it do a matte, we do no track matte. And we could move our little keyframes in. Just like this. All right, so we end up getting kind of a double whammy of Peaches coming into the scene. So it all kind of just depends on what you want and how you want to blend this together. You could also do things like use the particle illusion as an insert and use, for instance, like the tracking of the sleeve as what drives the motion of the particle illusion effect. So there's many, 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 many ways to go about compositing this. And this is just one way. So if you have any questions, please let me know. This is Office Hours with Mary Poplin. We're going to be closing. I'm going to give a couple of minutes for questions, and I'll answer them as we go. And that's that. So we do these every Tuesday at 1 p.m. I know today is Wednesday, but we had one of our developers who's wonderful. She's a senior developer named Larissa, was in the Apple video yesterday and the Apple release, and I didn't want to broadcast over showcasing her. So we bumped it to today. And she actually does the programming for Sapphire. So if you like the Sapphire programming, she's one of our lead developers for Sapphire. And make sure that you watch the Apple announcement video that played yesterday. Now, if you have any questions about Mocha or Continuum or Sapphire, please answer them in the chat and I'll be happy to answer them. And I see James has stayed here the whole time. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and close this up because I don't see a whole lot of questions. I really hope you enjoyed these office hours. I'm going to switch back to here for a second. I really hope you enjoyed these. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked this broadcast, please like and subscribe. If you do that, you'll be able to see when we do new office hours. Like I said, these are every Tuesday at 1 p.m. We hope you enjoyed it. Have a wonderful day.